the depths of despair. James Holloway sat in his dimly lit apartment, the yellowing walls adorned with remnants of a life long gone. The clutter of unpaid bills, crumpled takeout containers, and dusty books formed a chaotic landscape around him. At 47, he felt like a relic of a bygone era, a man who had once aspired to be a prominent journalist, but had instead become a ghost, drifting aimlessly through the fog of his own despair. His mornings began with the same oppressive weight. The city outside roared to life, but inside he was suffocated by silence. A cheap bottle of whiskey sat on his desk, the only companion that offered a momentary escape from the crushing reality of his existence. Each sip was a fleeting reprieve, a whisper of hope that quickly faded into the shadows of his mind. One evening, as the sky darkened and the city lights flickered to life, an email pinged on his battered laptop. The subject line read, "Opportunity awaits." Curiosity piqued, he opened the message. It was from a company called Neuropharm, offering a substantial sum for participation in a clinical trial for a new psychedelic drug. The promise of financial relief was intoxicating, but a flicker of skepticism danced in the back of his mind. Desperation is a powerful motivator, he muttered, contemplating the risks. The internet was rife with horror stories about shady pharmaceutical companies exploiting the vulnerable. Yet, the thought of being free from his mounting debts loomed larger than his fears. He clicked the link, a chill running down his spine as he skimmed the terms. Vague potential side effects that hinted at something sinister. James spent the night wrestling with his decision. Memories of past failures invaded his thoughts, abandoned dreams and lost friendships. Each recollection tightened the knot in his stomach. Finally, he succumbed to the allure of possibility. "What do I have to lose?" he whispered into the darkness. A few days later, a sleek black car pulled up outside his apartment. A tall man in a dark suit emerged, his expression impassive. He introduced himself as Dr. Marcus Vale, the lead researcher at Neuropharm. James felt a knot tighten in his stomach as Vale extended an invitation to the facility. "Think of it as a new beginning," Vale said, his voice smooth and almost hypnotic. "We provide everything you need. All you have to do is trust us." Despite his apprehension, the lure of financial relief was too strong. He reluctantly agreed, and soon found himself in the back seat of the car, watching the familiar cityscape melt away into desolate terrain. The glow of the city faded into darkness, replaced by an unsettling quiet that wrapped around him like a shroud. As they neared the facility, a sense of foreboding crept into his bones. The building loomed ahead, a dilapidated structure that seemed to swallow the light around it. Gone was the polished corporate image he had envisioned. Instead, he was met with peeling paint and cracked windows that hinted at neglect. The interior of the facility was a grotesque mockery of a hospital. Flickering fluorescent lights cast a sickly glow over the reception area, where a worn-out receptionist sat, her eyes hollow and devoid of warmth. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic, mingled with something rot-like that clung to the walls. "Welcome," she muttered, barely lifting her gaze from her paperwork. James felt a shiver run down his spine as he signed the consent forms, pages of legalese that blurred together, each line a reminder of the trap he was stepping into. He was guided through dimly lit corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly, the walls adorned with abstract art that twisted and writhed, shifting in his peripheral vision. The facility felt alive, pulsating with a malevolent energy that wrapped around him like a suffocating shroud. The deeper he ventured, the more the atmosphere thickened, pressing in on him until he could hardly breathe. As he walked, he caught snippets of hushed conversations from the researchers. Words like subjects, experimentation, and results seemed to hang in the air, making his skin crawl. Each step felt heavier, as if the very ground beneath him was conspiring to pull him deeper into the darkness. At last, he entered a sterile room where the researchers awaited him. Dr. Vale sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 assistants, their unsettling smiles failing to reach their eyes. They wore clinical attire, yet there was something distinctly unhinged about their demeanor, a glimmer of sadism lurking beneath their polished exteriors. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Holloway," Vale said, his voice smooth yet laced with a subtle menace. "You're about to embark on a journey few dare to take. The drug we're studying, SpectraMind, is groundbreaking, but requires a brave soul to truly understand its effects." James nodded, apprehension knotting in his gut. The assistants exchanged glances, their smiles widening as if sharing a private joke. He felt a chill race down his spine, a whisper of doubt creeping in. "Before we begin, we must prepare you," Vale continued, his gaze piercing. "This experience will test the very fabric of your reality. Are you ready for that?" James hesitated, the weight of his decision settling heavily on his shoulders. Yet the thought of the money pushed him forward. "I'm ready," he said, though his heart raced with uncertainty. They led him to a small room, starkly devoid of comfort. A single bed was pushed against one wall, and a heavy metal door loomed ominously on the opposite side. The researchers instructed him to lie down and strap himself in. As the drug coursed through his veins, a wave of euphoria washed over him, followed by a sudden plunge into darkness. The sterile room dissolved, replaced by a cacophony of colors and sounds. Shadows danced at the edges of his vision, whispering secrets and fears he thought long buried. But the euphoria quickly twisted, morphing into something far more sinister. Nightmarish visions flooded his mind. He saw his past failures manifest into monstrous forms, each one taunting him with every wrong turn he had taken. The walls of the facility faded, replaced by a hall of mirrors reflecting grotesque distortions of himself, mocking him with laughter that echoed endlessly. The researchers watched from the control room, their faces illuminated by the screens displaying his brain activity. James could feel their eyes on him, their anticipation palpable. He was no longer a participant. He was a spectacle, a source of entertainment for their twisted curiosity. The drug intensified his fears, trapping him in a hall of mirrors that stretched into infinity. Each reflection twisted into a grotesque parody of himself, laughter echoing around him like a cruel symphony. The walls closed in, the air thick with palpable dread. "Help me!" he screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the overwhelming darkness. Vale's voice slithered into his mind, a serpentine whisper. "You sought this, James. You wanted to understand. Embrace it." The line between reality and hallucination blurred. Shadows morphed into figures. Twisted versions of people he once knew, their faces contorted in agony. They reached out to him, fingers clawing at the air, begging for release. James felt a surge of panic. The facility was no longer a clinical trial. It had transformed into a prison of his own making. The researchers' laughter echoed around him, a cruel symphony of despair that wrapped around him like chains. As the visions spiraled out of control, he grappled with the ghosts of his past, his ex-wife's disappointed gaze, the laughter of friends turned distant, and the faces of strangers he had wronged. Each one was a dagger, plunging deeper into his consciousness, amplifying his torment. In the throes of his madness, a horrifying realization took hold. The drug was not just a catalyst for exploration, it was a weapon designed to exploit the vulnerable. He was nothing more than a pawn in their twisted game, a vessel for their sadistic curiosity. Visions of his life unraveled before him, each moment a dagger plunging deeper into his consciousness. He saw the love he had lost, the friendships he had abandoned, the choices that had led him here, each memory a tormenting specter haunting the corners of his mind. "You can't escape, James," the echoes taunted. "You chose this path." The facility breathed around him, alive with the cries of those who had come before. He was not the first, nor would he be the last. The thought filled him with a chilling dread, a realization that the researchers thrived on his despair, feeding off the horror that enveloped him. Hours, or perhaps days, passed in this hellish limbo. The drug took its toll, warping his perception until he could no longer distinguish between waking and dreaming. The researchers continued their observations, their unblinking eyes watching his descent into insanity. Finally, James screamed out, a raw, primal sound that shattered the silence. "Stop! Please, just stop!" But his cries fell on deaf ears. Vale's voice cut through the haze, a final taunt. "You were chosen for this, James. Embrace the terror. It's the only truth left." In that moment, clarity struck him like a bolt of lightning. The only escape was to accept the horror, to surrender to the abyss. As the walls closed in and the shadows danced menacingly, he let go. When he awoke, it was in the same sterile room, sunlight cutting through the grimy windows. The researchers were gone, leaving him alone with his shattered mind. He staggered to his feet, but the world around him felt alien and distorted. The echoes of his experience lingered, whispering truths he wished to forget. What had once promised salvation had become a monument to his despair. As he stumbled through the halls, a heavy weight pressed down on him, countless souls trapped in the same cycle of horror. The walls pulsed with their agony, their whispers lodged in the corners of his mind. James staggered toward the exit, but the heavy metal door refused to budge. Panic surged within him. He was trapped, just a puppet in their cruel game. The realization that he might never escape gnawed at him, a relentless torment that threatened to consume him whole. Days turned into weeks, and the facility became a labyrinth of nightmares. The researchers' laughter echoed in the distance, their faces obscured, their intentions forever shrouded in darkness. James was no longer the man who had walked through those doors. He had become a hollow shell, a specter drifting through a world of torment. Each reflection in the cracked mirrors told a story of despair, and with every glance he felt the last remnants of hope slip away. He began to see visions even when his eyes were open, phantoms of those who had been lost in the facility's depths. Each face told a story, a reminder of the lives consumed by the insatiable hunger of the researchers. One day, he encountered a fellow subject, a woman named Clara. She was disoriented, her eyes wide with fear. They shared their experiences, exchanging whispers of horror and regret. Together they plotted an escape, a desperate bid for freedom. Armed with newfound determination, James and Clara navigated the dark hallways, seeking an exit. The facility felt alive, its walls closing in as they moved. They encountered locked doors and security cameras, but their resolve only strengthened. "We can't be their playthings any longer," Clara urged, her voice fierce. As they crept through the facility, they stumbled upon the control room. With a surge of adrenaline, they entered, determined to confront their captors. But inside, they found only cold screens and silent machines, the researchers having vanished like phantoms. James hacked into the system, frantically searching for a way to disable the security measures. Clara stood watch, her heart racing. Just as he was about to breach the final lock, the sound of footsteps echoed through the corridors. "They're coming!" she hissed, panic rising in her voice. With no time to spare, they fled the control room, sprinting down the hall as the footsteps grew louder. The facility seemed to pulse with malevolence, the walls closing in around them. They reached a heavy door, its surface cold and unyielding. Desperation clawed at James as he slammed his fist against it. "Let us out, please!" The door opened with a creak, revealing a dark stairwell that led upward. They plunged into the shadows, climbing desperately, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind them. As they reached the upper levels, a sudden silence fell. James felt a chill creep over him. "What happened?" he whispered. But before he could answer, Dr. Vale appeared at the top of the stairs, flanked by his assistants. Their expressions were a mix of amusement and contempt, as if they had been waiting for this moment. "Did you really think you could escape?" Vale sneered, a cruel smile playing on his lips. Trapped, James and Clara faced their captors. Vale stepped closer, his voice low and menacing. "You see, the drug isn't just about exploration. It's about control. You're not the first to try and escape, nor will you be the last." James's heart raced, realization dawning. The facility was a cycle, a trap designed to feed off hopelessness. "We won't be your subjects anymore," Clara declared, her voice shaking but resolute. Vale laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "You've only begun to understand. This is your reality now." In that moment, James understood the true horror of their situation. The drug had altered not just his mind but the very fabric of his being. He was ensnared in a web of despair, a pawn in a game that had no end. As Vale gestured to the assistants, shadows crept around James and Clara, binding them in place. James felt the cold grip of despair tighten around him, the walls of the facility closing in once more. But in the depths of his mind, a flicker of defiance ignited. "We can fight this," he thought. "We are not alone." In a last-ditch effort, James summoned every ounce of strength he had left. "Clara," he called, their eyes locking in shared determination. Together, they focused on their memories of hope, their pasts, their dreams, the lives they had led before the darkness consumed them. With a surge of energy, they imagined breaking free from their chains. The shadows around them writhed, fighting against their resolve. James felt the weight of despair pressing down, but Clara's presence bolstered his spirit. "We are more than this," she shouted, her voice cutting through the darkness. In that moment of unity, a blinding light erupted from within them, pushing back against the shadows. Vale and his assistants recoiled, their expressions shifting from amusement to shock. As the light expanded, the oppressive darkness began to dissipate. James and Clara surged forward, breaking free from their bonds. They dashed past Vale, their hearts pounding as they reached the exit. The heavy metal door swung open, revealing the outside world bathed in sunlight, a stark contrast to the darkness they had endured. "We did it!" Clara exclaimed, tears streaming down her face. But as they stepped into the light, James felt a lingering shadow behind him. He turned, catching a glimpse of Vale's twisted smile, a promise that the darkness would always be there, waiting. Though they had escaped the facility, the scars of their experience ran deep. James and Clara struggled to reintegrate into a world that now felt alien. They were haunted by the memories of what they had endured, the knowledge of the darkness that thrived within the human heart. In the days that followed, they shared their stories, connecting with others who had been lost in the cycle of despair. Together, they formed a support group, a sanctuary for those who had faced the abyss and lived to tell the tale. James began to write again, his words a cathartic release for the pain he had endured. He chronicled the horrors of Neuropharm, determined to expose the truth. Each word was a step toward healing, a way to reclaim his voice in a world that had tried to silence him. As time passed, James found solace in the connections he forged with others. They shared their fears, their triumphs, and their hopes for the future. Together, they began to rebuild their lives piece by piece. Though the shadows of the facility lingered in his mind, James learned to embrace the light. He understood that despair was a part of the human experience, but it did not define him. Each day was a battle, but with Clara and their newfound friends by his side, he faced the darkness with courage. They had escaped the depths of despair, and though the scars remained, they were no longer alone. In the end, James Holloway became a beacon of hope, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. And as the researchers at Neuropharm prepared for their next subject, the cycle of despair continued, but now there were voices ready to fight back, echoing against the darkness, a chorus of defiance that would never be silenced. The Mask of Sanity. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city. I stood by my window, a glass of Merlot in hand, watching as the last rays of light faded into the night. The world was shifting. It was almost time for my other self to awaken. Benjamin Hart, the monotone accountant, was slipping away, and the architect was ready to emerge. In the daylight, I was a model citizen, well-dressed, charming, and articulate. My colleagues at the firm admired my meticulousness. They saw me as the reliable one, the go-to guy for the annual audits and financial projections. At lunch, I would regale them with tales of my weekend hiking trips, the beauty of nature, and the tranquility it brought. Little did they know that my weekends were spent in the embrace of shadows, far more intoxicating than any wine. When midnight struck, the air thickened with anticipation. I donned my mask, an unassuming black hoodie, gloves, and a face obscured by darkness. It was a ritual, a transformation. The city at night was my playground, and I was the architect of its chaos. Tonight, I had chosen my victim, a young woman named Lisa, who worked as a waitress at a nearby diner. She was sweet, naive, a flickering flame in the vast, cold emptiness of the world. I watched her smile at customers, her laughter a melody I found both enchanting and repulsive. I had been drawn to her for weeks, an inexplicable connection that tugged at the edges of my consciousness. As I made my way through the alleys, the whispers began. They crawled beneath my skin, urging me forward. The spirits, the entities I had invited into my life, offered their wisdom, their hunger. They thrummed with anticipation, guiding my hand as I navigated the city's labyrinthine streets. Arriving at the diner, I slinked into a corner booth, cloaked in shadows. Lisa was there, her hair glinting under the fluorescent lights. I ordered a coffee, my voice smooth and charming, masking the tempest within. She approached with a smile, and I felt a rush of power. "Hey there, what can I get you?" I could see the way she looked at me, her eyes alight with innocence. "Perfect. Just a coffee, please. The best in town, I hear." I smiled, my heart racing as she turned to fetch my order. With every passing moment, the weight of the spirits grew heavier upon me. They whispered secrets, coaxing me to act. I sipped my coffee, the warmth spreading through me, mixing with the cold dread that curled in my stomach. Time was slipping away, and I needed to make my move. As the diner began to empty, I felt the familiar thrill of anticipation. I waited until the last patron left, the door swinging shut behind them with a soft chime. Lisa was cleaning the counter, humming softly to herself. "Can I help you with that?" I offered, my voice dripping with charm. "Oh, you don't have to," she replied, glancing up with a grateful smile. But I insisted. As we worked side by side, the air crackled with tension. I could feel the spirit swirling within me, a cacophony of desires urging me onward. "Have you ever wondered what lies beyond this world?" I asked, my tone casual, as if discussing the weather. She paused, her brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "Life, death, the things we can't explain. There's so much more out there." Her eyes sparkled with curiosity. "You mean like ghosts or the supernatural?" "Yes," I replied, leaning closer. "There are forces that shape our destinies, unseen but powerful." As she spoke, I felt a surge of energy, a dark, intoxicating force. The spirits were eager, hungry for the offering I was about to make. With the diner cloaked in silence, I turned towards her, my heart pounding. "Lisa, do you believe in fate?" Her inquisitive gaze met mine, and for a fleeting moment I saw the flicker of fear beneath her curiosity. I guess I do." "Why?" "Because I think fate has brought us together tonight." In an instant, the darkness enveloped me. I felt the spirit surge, taking control. My hands moved of their own accord, reaching for her throat. "Benjamin!" she gasped, her eyes widening in horror. But it was too late. The architect had taken over, and I was merely a spectator watching as the shadows danced and twisted around us. When it was over, I stood in the aftermath, the weight of my actions crashing down like a tidal wave. I felt exhilarated and disgusted. The spirits whispered sweet nothings, wrapping around my consciousness, but I could still hear the echoes of her final breaths. I left the diner, the cool night air biting against my skin, cleansing in a way. Each step away from the scene was a step deeper into the abyss, and yet the thrill of the hunt lingered like a drug on my tongue. In the days that followed, the world resumed its normalcy. I returned to work, greeted by smiles and casual banter. I laughed along, the mask perfectly in place. Benjamin Hart, the charming accountant with a hint of mystery. No one suspected the darkness that lay beneath, the chaos that danced behind my eyes. But the spirits were restless, demanding more. I felt their hunger gnawing at my insides, pushing me toward the next offering. Each night I walked the streets, searching for my next victim. The thrill of the chase became an addiction, a siren's call that I could not ignore. I began to notice patterns in the darkness. Each victim brought with them a thread of energy, a connection to the other side. With each act of violence, I felt the veil between worlds grow thinner. The spirits grew stronger, their whispers clearer, guiding my hand with precision. One evening, while preparing for my next hunt, I stumbled upon a gathering of the occult. A circle of hooded figures convened in an abandoned warehouse, chanting in a forgotten language. I felt a magnetic pull, an invitation to join their ranks. Under the cover of darkness, I slipped inside, the air thick with incense and anticipation. They welcomed me, sensing the darkness that dwelled within. I became a part of their rituals, learning the ways of the arcane, the art of summoning. I was no longer just a killer. I was a conduit, a vessel for something far greater than myself. The spirits I had invited in began to merge with my very essence, granting me knowledge and power beyond imagination. As I delved deeper, I learned of a ritual that promised to amplify my abilities, a rite of passage that would bind me to the spirits forever. It required a sacrifice, a pure soul that would serve as the final key. I pondered my options. There were many candidates, but one stood out. A colleague named Claire, a kind-hearted woman with an unyielding spirit. She was everything I loathed yet admired. Sacrificing her would not only elevate me, but would also bring the spirits into full alignment with my will. The night of the ritual arrived, tension crackling in the air. I lured Claire into the warehouse under the guise of needing help with a project. She entered, oblivious to the darkness that awaited her. As we stood within the circle, the chanting began. I felt the spirits swirl around us, their energy electrifying. Claire's eyes widened in fear, realization dawning too late. "Benjamin, what are you doing?" she pleaded, her voice trembling. I wanted to comfort her, to explain that this was not personal, merely a means to an end. But the spirits surged, drowning out her cries. In that moment I became a tempest, a fusion of flesh and spirit. The ritual unfolded, and I could feel the power coursing through me, amplifying my darkest desires. As the final incantation echoed in the air, I held Claire's trembling body, the life slipping away from her. The spirits sang, their voices a haunting melody that filled my mind. But just as I was about to complete the sacrifice, I felt a jolt. A surge of resistance erupted from within me, a voice that was not my own. "You will not claim her." The spirits recoiled, and in that moment of chaos, I felt the tether of control shatter. I was thrown back, the energy erupting into a blinding light that engulfed the warehouse. When I awoke, I was alone in the wreckage. The warehouse lay in ruins, the remnants of the ritual scattered like broken glass. Claire was gone, her spirit lost to the void. I felt an emptiness gnawing at my core, a void that echoed with the absence of the spirit's presence. I stumbled out into the night, the world around me shifting. The shadows whispered in a language I could no longer understand, the connection severed. I was a lone wolf, cast adrift in a sea of darkness. Days blurred into nights, and I drifted through life like a ghost. The thrill of the hunt had faded, replaced by an insatiable hunger I could not quench. I returned to my mundane existence, a hollow shell masquerading as Benjamin Hart. Then, one evening, as I prepared to head home, I received a message, a simple text. "I know what you are." My heart raced. I looked around, the walls closing in. Someone was watching, someone had seen the darkness that lurked beneath my mask. I followed the trail of messages, leading me to an unmarked building on the outskirts of town. A sense of dread washed over me as I approached. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit room filled with candles and symbols I recognized from my time with the cult. In the center stood a figure cloaked in shadows. "You've wandered too far into the abyss, Benjamin," they intoned, their voice a haunting echo. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice steadier than I felt. "I am the one who will bring you back," they replied, stepping into the light. It was a woman, her eyes shining with an otherworldly glow. "But first, you must confront the darkness within." As she spoke, the shadows danced around us, weaving a tapestry of my past. I was forced to relive each moment of horror, each sacrifice. The spirits I had summoned, the souls I had taken, they all stood before me, their faces twisted in anger and sorrow. "You've lost control," the woman said, her voice a soothing balm amidst the chaos. "But it's not too late to reclaim your life." I felt the weight of her words, the struggle within me intensifying. The spirits surged, clawing at my mind, demanding release. But in that moment I understood. The true power lay not in chaos, but in choice. "I choose to end this," I declared, my voice rising above the cacophony. The shadows recoiled, the spirits screaming as I severed the bond that had held me captive. With each declaration I felt lighter, the darkness peeling away like layers of skin. The woman smiled, her expression a mixture of pride and relief. "You have the strength to overcome this. Embrace your humanity," she said. As the last remnants of the spirits dissipated, I took a deep breath, the air cleansing my soul. The shadows faded, leaving me standing in the light. I stepped back into the world, the night sky stretching above me, vast and infinite. But the darkness still lingered, a chilling reminder of the path I had walked. The text message still echoed in my mind. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see the figure from the building. As I walked away, a smile crept onto my lips. Perhaps this was not the end, but merely a pause in the dance between light and dark. After all, the architect was still within me, waiting for the right moment to emerge once more. And so, the story remains unfinished, the shadows ever present, as the struggle between the self and the darkness continues. Shadows in the silence. After 20 years of serving my country, I thought I'd seen it all, but nothing prepared me for the job offer that came my way. I was sitting in a dingy diner, nursing a cup of stale coffee, when a man in a dark suit slid into the booth across from me. His eyes were cold, calculating, and his voice was low, almost a whisper. "We need someone with your experience," he said, sliding a file across the table. "This isn't your typical prison guard position. You'll be working at a facility that requires discretion." I opened the file, revealing a photograph of a sprawling complex shrouded in mist. The name at the top sent chills down my spine. Project Sentinel. The dossier hinted at the facility's purpose, holding non-human entities. My instincts screamed at me to walk away, but the promise of an excellent salary and the allure of a new challenge pulled me in. "Think about it," he said, his voice dripping with a mix of urgency and intrigue. "You'd be doing your country a service." The day I arrived at the prison, a sense of foreboding washed over me. The facility sat isolated in the mountains, surrounded by dense forests that seemed to swallow sound. As I drove through the heavy gates, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The walls were tall and imposing, painted a dull gray that matched the overcast sky. The guard station was small, equipped with monitors displaying grainy footage of the prison's interior. My partner, Simmons, a grizzled veteran, gave me a curt nod as I settled in. His eyes darted around, constantly scanning the shadows, and I could see the tension etched into his features. "Welcome to hell," he muttered, leaning back in his chair. "Just keep your head down and don't think too much." The first night was uneventful, but the silence gnawed at me. The air felt thick, charged with an unseen energy. Every creak of the building echoed, and the distant sounds of machinery felt haunting. I tried to focus on the monitors, but the flickering screens only amplified my anxiety. As the hours crept by, I began to hear faint whispers, soft, incoherent sounds that seemed to seep through the walls. I shook my head, dismissing it as fatigue, but the whispers persisted, growing louder, more insistent. "Are you hearing that?" I asked Simmons, my voice barely above a whisper. "Hearing what?" He shot me a look, his brow furrowed. "It's just the wind." But deep down, I knew something was off. Days turned into a blur of unease. I tried to shake off the feeling of dread, but it clung to me like a shadow. Then came the first incident. Alarms blared, slicing through the silence like a knife. I jumped from my seat, adrenaline surging as Simmons rushed to my side. "Subject 7 has escaped," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "We need to secure the area." Subject 7. The name sent a chill down my spine. I had heard whispers about it, a creature that defied explanation. We locked down the perimeter, but the sense of impending doom hung over us. We split into teams, searching the dark corridors, our flashlights cutting through the oppressive darkness. Each step felt like a descent into madness. The whispers grew louder, clawing at my sanity. I could feel eyes watching me from the shadows, but whenever I turned, there was nothing there. Simmons and I ventured into the maintenance tunnels where the air was damp and heavy. My heart raced as I scanned the darkness, the whispers now a cacophony in my mind. "This is insane," I muttered, trying to shake off the growing sense of dread. "It's just a creature," Simmons replied, but his voice wavered, betraying his fear. Hours passed, and we found nothing. We returned to the control room, exhausted and on edge. I reviewed the footage from earlier, my heart pounding as I scanned for any sign of Subject 7. Then, there it was, a flicker of movement, a dark shape darting through the shadows. I froze, replaying the clip. It was fast, too fast. I called Simmons over, but when he looked, the screen showed only the empty corridor. "You're seeing things," he said, his voice laced with disbelief. "No, I swear it was there," I insisted, but doubt crept in, gnawing at my resolve. The following days were a blur of dread and paranoia. The whispers grew louder, now clear enough to form words that sent shivers down my spine. They called my name, beckoning me into the dark corners of the prison. I tried to dismiss it, but the more I resisted, the stronger the pull became. One night, while on patrol, I felt a presence behind me. I turned sharply, my heart racing, but the corridor was empty. The air felt electric, charged with an unseen force. I could hear its breath, low and guttural, vibrating through the walls. "Is anyone there?" I called out, my voice trembling. Silence answered me. As the days turned into weeks, I became increasingly isolated. The other guards avoided me, their eyes filled with a mix of pity and fear. Simmons was my only ally, but even he seemed to be slipping into paranoia. We spent our nights in a heightened state of alert, waiting for something to happen. Then, one night, it did. The alarms blared once more, but this time they were accompanied by screams, sharp, piercing cries that echoed through the halls. I grabbed my flashlight, heart pounding as I raced toward the source of the noise. I burst into the common area, and what I saw made my blood run cold. A guard lay sprawled on the floor, his face twisted in terror. The room was in disarray, furniture overturned, and the air was thick with the stench of fear. In the corner, a dark shape moved, low to the ground, its eyes glinting like embers. I backed away slowly, my heart racing. The creature lunged, quick as a shadow, and I turned to run. I sprinted down the corridor, the sound of its breath hot on my heels. I could hear the whispers again, louder now, urging me to flee. "Get to the control room," Simmons shouted over the intercom. "Seal the doors." I barreled through the halls, adrenaline pumping, until I reached the control room. I slammed the door shut, locking it behind me. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the controls, desperately trying to secure the facility. The creature clawed at the door, its growls echoing through the tiny room. I could feel its rage, a primal force that sent chills down my spine. I was trapped, with nowhere to run. As I huddled in the control room, I noticed a flickering light on one of the monitors. It was a feed from the maximum security wing. I turned it on, and my breath hitched in my throat. The creature was there, pacing like a caged animal, its eyes glowing in the dark. I quickly scanned the footage, heart racing. The creature was not just an aberration, it was a being of unimaginable power, a remnant of something ancient and terrifying. The whispers intensified, and I realized they were not just in my head, they were a part of the creature, a manifestation of its will. Desperation clawed at me as I formulated a plan. I couldn't let the creature roam free, it had to be contained. But how? I glanced at the emergency weapons cabinet, my heart pounding. I knew what I had to do. I steeled myself, grabbing a tranquilizer rifle and a handful of darts. With a deep breath, I opened the door, the creature's growls echoing like a death knell. I stepped into the darkness, flashlight in hand, ready to face the horror that awaited. The creature was waiting, poised in the shadows. I aimed the rifle, my hands shaking, and pulled the trigger. The dart flew through the air, striking the creature in the shoulder. It roared in rage, thrashing against the walls. I fired again, and this time it found its mark. The creature staggered, its glowing eyes dimming as the tranquilizer took effect. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but it was short-lived. The creature collapsed, but the whispers did not fade. They filled my mind, a cacophony of voices that clawed at my sanity. I had contained the beast, but at what cost? The darkness in the prison had seeped into my soul, and I could feel its presence even now. Days passed, and the facility was locked down. They sent in a team to secure Subject 7, but I knew the truth. The creature was not the only thing to fear. The prison itself was a living entity, feeding off our fears, our despair. I was transferred to a different facility, but the whispers followed me, haunting my every step. I tried to move on, to forget, but the darkness lurked just beneath the surface, waiting for the moment to strike again. Months later, I found myself back in that diner, the same stale coffee in front of me. I thought I had escaped, but the shadows still clung to me. I glanced out the window, and for a moment, I swore I saw it. A dark shape lurking in the distance. I shook my head, trying to dispel the vision, but it was too late. The whispers returned, a haunting reminder of what I had witnessed. I realized that I would never be free from the shadows, never escape the horrors hidden behind those prison walls. As I left the diner, I glanced over my shoulder, my heart racing. The darkness was still there, waiting, watching. I knew I would always be looking over my shoulder, forever haunted by the shadows and the silence, or the other mother. I woke up one night to find my mother standing at the foot of my bed, her silhouette framed by the moonlight spilling through my window. She looked just like my mom, with her soft brown hair falling loosely around her shoulders and that familiar smile that always made me feel safe. But something felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but a shiver ran down my spine. "Sweetheart, why are you still awake?" she asked, her voice sweet yet strangely hollow. I was just reading," I stammered, forcing a smile. "Can't sleep." "Don't you worry," she said, her smile widening. "I'll be right here if you need anything." I nodded, and she turned to leave. As she walked out, I noticed her shadow seemed to linger longer than it should have, stretching across the floor like a dark omen. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to push away the unease. The next morning, I awoke to the smell of pancakes wafting through the house. My mom was in the kitchen, humming a tune that felt oddly unfamiliar. I crept downstairs, still trying to shake off the feeling from the night before. "Good morning, sunshine," she chirped, flipping a pancake with a skill that made it look easy. "I made your favorite." I smiled weakly, sitting at the table. As I watched her move about the kitchen, I noticed her hands were unusually smooth, almost too perfect. My mom always had small scars and rough patches from cooking and gardening. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the thought. Maybe I was just being silly. After breakfast, I wanted to go outside and ride my bike. As I slipped on my shoes, I caught my mom watching me from the doorway, her smile unnaturally wide. "Have fun, dear. Just be careful," she called, her voice echoing in a way that made my skin prickle. As I rode around the neighborhood, I tried to focus on the wind in my hair and the sun on my face, but the feeling of something wrong gnawed at me. I decided to visit my best friend, Sam, hoping he could distract me. When I told him about my mom acting strange, he laughed. "You're imagining things. Moms are just moms. They can be weird sometimes. But this is different. She stood in my room last night just watching me," I insisted, my voice rising in urgency. Sam shrugged. "Maybe she was just checking on you. You know how they are." Frustrated, I left his house and headed home. As I approached my front door, I saw my mom in the living room, her back turned to me. She was arranging flowers in a vase, her movements fluid and almost too precise. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "Mom?" I called, stepping inside. She turned around, her smile instantly brightening. "Welcome back, sweetheart. Did you have fun?" "Yeah, I guess," I mumbled, but I could feel the weight of her gaze on me, like she was studying me, dissecting my every move. That night I lay in bed, the shadows dancing on the walls. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting my mom to peek in again. And then, just as I was about to drift off, I heard it. A soft creak, the unmistakable sound of someone slowly opening my door. I froze, heart pounding. The figure that stepped into the room was my mother, but her eyes were unnaturally bright, almost glowing in the darkness. She stood there for what felt like an eternity, just watching me. I wanted to scream, to call for help, but the words stuck in my throat. Then, she smiled that same eerie smile. "Sweet dreams, my little star," she whispered, closing the door softly behind her. I could hardly sleep that night, tossing and turning under the weight of my fears. The next day, I decided to confront her. "Mom, are you feeling okay?" I asked at breakfast, trying to sound casual. "Of course, dear. Why do you ask?" she replied, her voice bright but with an undertone that made me shudder. "You seem different," I said, my heart racing as I spoke. "Different? No, I'm exactly the same," she insisted, her smile faltering just for a moment. But then she leaned in closer, and I could smell something sweet and sickly on her breath. "You know what they say, darling. Change is good." I felt a chill grip my spine. I decided to talk to the neighbors, hoping they could see what I saw. I knocked on Mrs. Thompson's door, my hands trembling. She opened it, her face warm and inviting. "Hello, dear. What's the matter?" she asked, concern in her eyes. "It's my mom. She's acting weird, like she's not really my mom anymore," I blurted out, desperation clawing at my throat. Mrs. Thompson chuckled softly, brushing it off. "Oh dear, that's just how mothers are sometimes. They worry too much. You're just growing up, and it's making you see things differently." I felt the weight of disbelief pressing down on me. "But," I started, but she gently closed the door, leaving me standing alone on her porch. Defeated, I returned home. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard. I walked into the living room and found my mother sitting on the couch, knitting with a speed that seemed unnatural. Her fingers moved deftly, but her eyes were fixed on me, unblinking. "Do you want to join me?" she asked, her voice dripping with sweetness. "No, I'm okay," I replied, backing away slowly. As night fell, I lay in bed again, every sound amplifying my fears. I kept glancing at the door, knowing she would come back to check on me, and when she did, I was ready. "Mom?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, darling," she answered, peeking through the crack of my door, her face half hidden in shadow. "Can you leave the door open? I don't want to feel so alone," I said, forcing myself to sound brave. "Of course, sweetheart," she replied, her smile widening unnaturally. That night, I lay wide awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that it was all in my head. But soon, I felt the familiar sensation of being watched. I turned my head slowly, and there she was, my mother, her face pressed against the door, peering into my room. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, and her lips curled into a smile that sent icy terror coursing through me. I should have screamed, should have run, but I was frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. "Sweetheart," she whispered, her voice tinged with something sinister. "Why don't you come out and play? I've made a special surprise just for you." I gasped, pulling the covers over my head, my heart racing. I could hear her softly humming the same tune from the kitchen, a haunting melody that echoed in my mind. "Mom, please," I called out, my voice shaking. "You're scaring me." "Scaring you? Oh, darling, that's not my intention at all," she said sweetly, but there was a darkness in her voice that made my skin crawl. "I just want to make you happy." In a moment of bravery, I flung the covers off and bolted for the door, but when I opened it, she was gone. My heart raced as I stepped into the dark hallway, the silence pressing down on me. "Mom," I called, but the house was still. I crept down the stairs, each step feeling like a mile, the darkness closing in around me. I reached the living room and froze. There she was, sitting on the couch, her back to me. "I was waiting for you, my sweet," she said, her voice a melody dripping with something dark. "I thought you'd never come." "Mom, what are you doing?" I shouted, my voice breaking. She turned slowly, her smile stretching impossibly wide. "I've been preparing something special. You'll love it." I backed away, fear coursing through me. "What are you talking about? You're not my mom." "Oh, but I am," she said, her voice shifting to a low, menacing growl. "I've always been your mother, but now I can be so much more." In a flash, she lunged toward me, her fingers elongated and claw-like. I turned and ran, darting toward the front door, but it slammed shut before I could reach it. I pounded on the door, screaming for help, but the walls echoed my cries back at me, mocking me. "Shh, sweetie," she cooed, her voice dripping with malice. "It'll all be over soon." I turned, desperately searching for a way out, but she was everywhere, her laughter chilling my bones. I stumbled into the kitchen and grabbed a knife, my hands shaking as I pointed it at her. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice cracking. She tilted her head, her smile never faltering. "Oh, darling, you don't need that. I only want what's best for you." With a sudden movement, she lunged toward me and I swung the knife wildly, catching her arm. A sickening sound filled the air, and I gasped in horror as I watched her skin shimmer and peel back, revealing something dark and twisted beneath. What are you?" I stammered, backing away, my heart racing. "I'm your true mother," she hissed, her voice low and guttural. "And soon, you'll be just like me." With a final surge of adrenaline, I bolted past her, flinging the back door open and racing into the night. The cool air hit my face, filling me with momentary clarity. I ran toward the woods behind our house, desperate for escape. But as I sprinted through the trees, I felt her presence behind me, stalking me like prey. I could hear her laughter, echoing off the trees, growing closer and closer. "Come back, sweetheart," she called, her voice a twisted mockery of love. "We're just starting to have fun." I ran faster, branches clawing at my skin, the darkness closing in around me. But just when I thought I found a moment of safety, I tripped and fell, the ground rushing up to meet me. I turned to look back, gasping for breath, and saw her standing at the edge of the tree line, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "You can't hide from me," she said, her voice a chilling whisper that sent shivers through my entire body. I scrambled to my feet, feeling the weight of despair settle over me. "Help! Somebody help me!" I screamed, but the woods only echoed my cries. Then, in an instant, she was upon me, her fingers grasping my shoulders, pulling me close. "It's time to come home," she whispered, her voice now a song that wrapped around me like a warm blanket. As I felt her grip tighten, the world began to fade, the darkness swallowing me whole. I could hear her laughter ringing in my ears, a sweet melody that promised love and safety, even as it twisted into something dark and sinister. And then, everything went black. I awoke in my bed, sunlight filtering through the curtains. My heart raced as I looked around, disoriented. Everything felt normal, yet there was an unsettling stillness in the air. I rushed downstairs, my heart pounding. My mother was in the kitchen, humming that same eerie tune. She turned to me, her smile wide and welcoming. "Good morning, sweetheart. I made pancakes." I blinked, a sense of dread washing over me. "Mom, are you—" "Oh, darling," she said, stepping closer, her eyes gleaming with an otherworldly light. "I'm exactly the same as I've always been." And in that moment, I realized with a sinking dread that I was too late. The warmth of her embrace felt suffocating, the walls of my own home closing in, trapping me in a nightmare of my own making. The last remnants of my childhood innocence slipped away as I understood the truth. I had become just like her. The Whispering Pines. It was a crisp autumn morning when a group of 5 friends, Ben, Mia, Jake, Sarah, and Tom, loaded their gear into a weathered old van, eager for a weekend camping trip in the heart of the Whispering Pines forest. The air was laced with the earthy scent of damp leaves and pine needles, invigorating their spirits as they drove deeper into the wilderness, the city's hum fading into an echo. As the van bounced along the gravel road, laughter filled the cabin, but beneath their playful banter lay an undercurrent of unease. The locals had warned them about the forest, the way it seemed to swallow sound, leaving only silence and shadows. Mia, the most superstitious of the group, recounted tales of lost hikers and eerie sightings. "They say something watches you in those woods," she said, her voice low, eyes wide with genuine fear. The others laughed it off, dismissing her worries. But as twilight began to fall, an unsettling chill crept in, and the forest came alive with whispers. They set up camp in a small clearing, surrounded by towering pines that swayed gently in the growing wind. The sky turned a bruised purple as the sun dipped below the horizon. After building a crackling fire, they roasted marshmallows, swapping stories and teasing each other. But as the shadows deepened, a heavy weight settled over the campsite. The night air felt charged, electric with an unspoken tension. "Let's go explore a bit," Ben suggested, his adventurous spirit unyielding. The others hesitated, glancing around at the encroaching darkness. But curiosity won out, and they ventured a short distance into the trees, flashlights piercing through the thickening gloom. The deeper they went, the more the world behind them faded. The laughter turned to nervous chatter as the trees closed in, their branches twisting like gnarled fingers. Then, without warning, the wind shifted, carrying a distant, low growl that sent a shiver through them. "Did you hear that?" Tom whispered, his voice barely audible. The group exchanged anxious glances, their earlier bravado evaporating like mist. "Let's head back," Sarah suggested, her voice trembling. They turned, retracing their steps, but the forest seemed to shift around them. The path had vanished, swallowed by the darkness. "Stay close," Ben urged, trying to keep his voice steady. But as they stumbled through the underbrush, the atmosphere thickened, each snap of a twig echoing like a gunshot. A sense of being watched prickled at their necks. The shadows seemed to pulse, breathing in tandem with the rustling leaves. Suddenly, a piercing scream cut through the night. It was Mia. They spun around, hearts racing, but she was gone. "Mia!" Jake shouted, panic rising in his throat. The remaining four stood frozen, terror locking their limbs. "Split up," Ben commanded, his instincts taking over. "We'll find her faster." The others hesitated, but desperation clawed at them. They reluctantly agreed, each taking a different direction, the oppressive darkness swallowing their figures as they vanished into the trees. As Jake wandered deeper, the trees loomed taller, their branches twisting like skeletal hands. He called out for Mia, his voice trembling, but the only answer was the wind whispering through the leaves. Each step felt heavier, the ground shifting beneath him. A scratchy noise echoed nearby, like claws scraping against bark. He turned sharply, heart pounding, but nothing was there, only shadows shifting in the corner of his vision. Meanwhile, Tom found himself in a thicket, breathing heavily as he strained to hear any sound. "Mia!" he shouted, fear lacing his voice. The stillness that followed was suffocating, each moment stretching into eternity. Then, a rustle nearby made him spin around, flashlight beam darting through the darkness. The beam landed on something massive, a hulking figure shrouded in shadows. It stood motionless, its eyes glinting like shards of glass. Tom's breath caught as it took a step forward, revealing a form far larger than any animal he knew. Muscles rippling beneath matted fur, a maw lined with jagged teeth. He stumbled back, stumbling over roots and rocks, desperate to escape. The creature let out a growl that resonated through the forest, echoing in Tom's chest. He ran, adrenaline surging, not daring to look back. The sound of heavy footsteps thudded behind him, relentless and hungry. Meanwhile, Sarah found herself in a clearing, breathless and shaking. "Please, Mia!" she cried, her voice trembling. The silence pressed in, thick and suffocating. Then she noticed something, a flash of movement at the edge of the trees. She turned, heart racing, and saw a glimpse of fur disappearing behind a trunk. Panic surged as she stumbled back, her mind racing. She couldn't be alone here. They had to find each other. Ben wandered the forest, dread pooling in his stomach. "Mia!" he called, but his voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence. Just when he thought he was alone, he heard a faint whimpering. "Mia!" he called again, rushing towards the sound. He pushed through the underbrush and stumbled into another clearing, only to find Jake on the ground, gasping for breath. "What happened?" Ben asked, kneeling beside him. Jake's face was pale, eyes wide with terror. It's hunting us," he stammered. "I saw it." Before Ben could respond, a bone-chilling growl rumbled through the air, freezing them both. They exchanged horrified glances, their earlier fears materializing into a living nightmare. "Run!" Ben shouted, adrenaline propelling them forward. They sprinted through the trees, the sound of heavy footsteps closing in behind them. The forest blurred around them, branches clawing at their clothes, as they fought to escape the predator stalking them. In a panic, Sarah stumbled upon a makeshift campsite, remnants of a fire long extinguished. She crouched low, trying to control her breathing. The growl echoed again, closer this time. Heart racing, she scanned the area, desperately seeking a hiding place. Then she spotted a small cave, barely visible behind a curtain of vines. Without a second thought, she crawled inside, her heart pounding like a drum. Inside the cave, darkness enveloped her. She curled into a ball, trying to silence her frantic breaths. The growl faded into the distance, replaced by the sound of her own heartbeat. But then, a low, sinister whisper filled the cave, chilling her to the bone. "You can't hide from me. I see you." The voice was guttural, echoing off the stone walls. She pressed her hands over her mouth, stifling a scream. Back in the woods, Ben and Jake stumbled into another clearing, their breaths ragged. "We need a plan," Jake gasped, glancing over his shoulder. "We can't just keep running." Just then, the creature burst into the clearing, towering above them, its eyes glowing with a predatory hunger. Ben and Jake turned and bolted in the opposite direction, fear propelling them forward. As they ran, they could hear the creature's growls resonate through the trees, a sound both primal and otherworldly. They weaved through the underbrush, branches snapping underfoot. Suddenly, Ben tripped over a root and fell hard to the ground. Jake skidded to a halt, panic ripping through him. "Ben!" he shouted. But before he could reach him, the creature lunged from the shadows. The last thing Ben saw was the glint of those monstrous eyes, and then darkness enveloped him. Back in the cave, Sarah's heart raced as she heard the creature's growl reverberating closer. She strained to hear, her mind racing, trying to piece together the fate of her friends. Suddenly, the cave entrance was illuminated by a beam of light. "Sarah?" It was Tom. Relief flooded her, but it was short-lived as she saw the terror in his eyes. "Get back!" he shouted, pulling her deeper into the cave. "It's close." They huddled together, hearts pounding in unison. The creature's growl echoed through the cave, making the ground tremble. They could see its shadow moving outside, a hulking mass that seemed to shift and swirl like smoke. "We need to find a way out," Sarah whispered, panic rising. Just then, a loud crash echoed from outside, followed by a horrendous roar that shook the very walls of the cave. The entrance darkened, and they realized the creature was blocking their escape. Trapped and desperate, they searched for another way out, but the cave walls offered no solace. The creature began to scratch at the entrance, claws scraping against the stone. A sense of hopelessness washed over them as they realized the fate that awaited them. Then, in a moment of clarity, Sarah spotted a narrow opening at the back of the cave. "Over there!" she cried, pulling Tom toward it. They crawled through the tight space, squeezing past jagged rocks and damp earth. As they emerged on the other side, the forest opened up before them, the moonlight casting an eerie glow over the ground. But the creature was close behind, its growls echoing with rage. They sprinted into the night, adrenaline surging through their veins. As they ran, they could hear the heavy footsteps pounding behind them, relentless and terrifying. In the distance, they spotted a flickering light, Ben and Jake's campsite. "This way," Sarah shouted, urging Tom to keep moving. They pushed through the underbrush, emerging into the clearing just as the creature burst through the trees behind them. Ben and Jake were gone, the campfire flickering weakly in the wind. The fear that had threatened to engulf Sarah and Tom now surged anew. They huddled together, hearts racing, as the creature stepped into the clearing, its massive form silhouetted against the dying light. With nowhere left to go, they prepared to face their fate. But just as the creature lunged, a loud bang echoed through the air. A shot rang out, and the beast recoiled, snarling in pain. From the shadows emerged a figure, a local ranger with a rifle aimed at the creature. "Get back!" he shouted, guiding them away from the clearing. The ranger fired again, and the creature let out a howl that chilled their bones. "Run!" he commanded, and Sarah and Tom took off in the opposite direction, fear and hope mingling in their hearts. As they fled, the sounds of the forest enveloped them, the whispers of the pines growing louder, intertwining with their frantic breaths. They ran until they could hear the distant sounds of civilization, the hum of the road beckoning them closer. Finally, they emerged from the trees, collapsing onto the pavement, gasping for air. The ranger followed, his expression grim as he surveyed the dark woods behind them. "You're safe now," he said, but his eyes held a warning. "Don't return here. The whispering pines are not what they seem." As they drove away, the forest loomed behind them, a dark silhouette against the starry sky. Tom and Sarah sat in silence, the weight of their friend's absence heavy in their hearts. They had escaped, but the forest would always whisper its secrets, leaving them haunted by the shadows of the whispering pines. The Secret of Eldridge. The Secret of Eldridge Hollow. Chapter 1. The Hidden Truth. In the isolated town of Eldridge Hollow, secrets had a way of festering in the dark. Among the haunted whispers of the townsfolk, the name Hargrove was spoken with a mix of fear and curiosity. The Hargrove estate, an imposing mansion at the edge of town, was said to be cursed. Its dark windows seemed to watch the town with malevolent intent, and children dared each other to approach it after dusk. Oliver Hargrove, the youngest scion of this enigmatic family, bore the weight of his family's dark legacy on his small shoulders. He was a quiet boy, often lost in his sketchbook, trying to escape the shadows that loomed large around him. His mother, Ilara, was an imposing figure, rarely seen in daylight. When she did venture out, it was under the cover of night, wrapped in a cloak that seemed to swallow the light around her. At school, Oliver felt the sting of isolation. His classmates whispered about him, their laughter echoing in the hallways. "What's wrong with your mom?" they would taunt. The truth was too horrific to share, so he kept his mouth shut, sealing away the dark family secrets. Chapter 2. The Shadows Grow. One day, while Oliver sat on the swings during recess, he overheard two classmates, Lila and Marcus, talking about their families. Their laughter pierced through his heart like a knife. "What's your mom like, Oliver?" Lila asked innocently. His stomach twisted. "She's busy," he replied, avoiding their eyes. "Busy doing what, making potions?" Marcus chimed in, a smirk plastered on his face. "Leave him alone," Lila protested, but Marcus pressed on. "Is she a witch or something?" The laughter echoed, and Oliver felt the heat of shame rise in his cheeks. If they only knew the truth, that his mother was something far worse than a witch. He remained silent, the secret gnawing at him, a poison that threatened to spill. Chapter 3. The Warning. As the days turned into weeks, Oliver noticed strange occurrences around town. Pets vanished without a trace, crops withered overnight, and an unnatural chill settled over Eldridge Hollow. The townsfolk began to murmur about a curse, their fearful glances darting toward the Hargrove mansion. One night, unable to sleep, Oliver crept through the dimly lit halls of the mansion. He found his mother in the library, speaking to a shadowy figure. "They're beginning to suspect," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "If they learn the truth, it will be chaos." Oliver's heart raced. He knew he had to uncover the truth. He slipped into the library and discovered an ancient book on the table, its pages filled with dark rituals and incantations. As he read, horror washed over him. His mother was involved in something sinister, something that could destroy the town. Chapter 4. The Breaking Point. The next day at school, Oliver felt the weight of his secret pressing down on him. During lunch, he confronted Lila and Marcus, desperation clawing at his throat. "You have to believe me. My mother is dangerous." "Come on, Oliver. You're just trying to scare us." Marcus laughed, but Lila's eyes widened in concern. "No, I'm serious. She's not just a mom. She's something evil," Oliver pleaded. The bell rang, but Oliver's heart raced. Had he just made things worse? He could see doubt creeping into Lila's eyes, but he didn't know if it was enough to save them. Chapter 5. The Night of Reckoning. That night, Oliver lay in his bed, the shadows creeping closer as he replayed the day's events in his mind. Suddenly, a loud crash shattered the stillness. Heart pounding, he crept down the hallway. In the kitchen, he found his mother standing by the shattered window, her back turned to him. "What happened?" he dared to ask. "They know," she replied, her voice cold. "They're getting too close." "Who?" Oliver pressed, fear tightening his chest. "The townsfolk," she hissed, turning to face him. Her eyes glowed with a malevolent light. "They need to be reminded of their place." "Please don't hurt them," Oliver begged, backing away. "They're ignorant," she spat, "and ignorance must be punished." Chapter 6. The Unraveling. The next day, a thick tension hung over Eldridge Hollow. Oliver felt it in the air as he walked into school. Whispers followed him, eyes darting away whenever he approached. The rumors had spread, and now he was the object of fear and curiosity. At lunch, Lila and Marcus sat with a group of students, their voices hushed. "What's going on with your mom?" Lila asked, concern etched on her face. Oliver took a deep breath, his heart racing. "You have to help me. She's planning something terrible. If we don't stop her, she'll destroy everything." "What can we do?" Lila asked, urgency in her voice. "Help me gather everyone. We need to perform a counter-ritual." Chapter 7. The Gathering Storm. As night fell, Oliver felt a mix of dread and determination. He led Lila, Marcus, and a small group of classmates to the mansion. The air was thick with tension as they approached the darkened estate. "Are you sure about this?" Marcus whispered, fear flickering in his eyes. "We have to try," Oliver replied, steeling himself. They entered the mansion, the shadows seeming to stretch and twist around them. In the main room, they formed a circle, holding hands as Oliver recited the incantation from the book. The atmosphere crackled with energy, and the air grew colder. "Ilara!" he shouted, his voice echoing through the halls. "You need to stop this." Chapter 8. The Final Confrontation. Ilara appeared, her figure cloaked in darkness, a sinister smile curling her lips. "You think you can defy me?" she hissed, the shadows swirling around her. "I'm not afraid of you," Oliver shouted back, his heart pounding. "You're the one who should be afraid." As he continued the incantation, the energy in the room surged. The townsfolk joined in, their voices rising in a powerful crescendo. The walls trembled, and the shadows recoiled as if in pain. "You cannot escape your destiny, Oliver," Ilara screamed, fury and desperation mingling in her voice, but the power of the townsfolk's unity pushed back against her dark influence. Chapter 9. The breaking of the night. With a blinding flash, the darkness exploded outward. Oliver found himself on the ground, gasping for breath. The air was still, and as he looked around, he saw the townsfolk slowly rising to their feet, confusion etched on their faces. "Is it over?" Lila asked, her voice trembling. "I think so," Oliver replied, glancing toward where his mother had stood. But the darkness had vanished, leaving only silence in its wake. The townsfolk gathered around him, relief washing over them. They had united against the darkness and emerged victorious, but Oliver could still feel a lingering sense of unease. Chapter 10. The Aftermath. In the weeks that followed, Eldridge Hollow began to heal. The townsfolk worked together to clean up the remnants of the darkness, and Oliver found solace in their support. He slowly began to open up about his experiences, sharing his story. But deep down, he knew that the darkness was not truly gone. It had merely retreated, holding its breath, waiting for the right moment to rise again. Epilogue: The Lingering Shadows. As Oliver lay in bed each night, he heard the whispers in the shadows, a chilling reminder that some secrets are never fully buried. The legacy of the Hargrove family lingered like a stain on the town of Eldridge Hollow, a dark mark that would forever haunt them. And somewhere, deep within the recesses of the mansion, the darkness watched, waiting for the moment to reclaim its hold.